And the reaction I get from that comment or that statement of what I do and what my profession is, it changes depending on where I am. My name is Sebastian Mariz, or Sebastian Mariz, depending on if I want to say it in the Spanish or an English way, and I'm a lobbyist, government relations consultant, public affairs advisor. Lobbying is influencing the opinion of decision-maker policymakers, not taking the decisions for them, influencing their opinions. Who are the policymakers? They're legislators, so members of parliament. They're the executive, so ministers and secretaries of state. And they're civil servants in the public administration. Yeah, I kind of fell into it. So I wanted to do international journalism, and rather than doing a master's in international journalism, I got into a master's in the construction of the European Union in Brussels, so in the heart of the European Union. And after I finished my master's, I started looking for a job. I started working for the American Chamber of Commerce that has a specific lobby group that's called the EU Committee of the American Chamber of Commerce. And actually that committee, what it does is it's a lobby group that represents the interests of American companies before European Union institutions to influence the opinion of those policymakers in the European Union. And that's how I fell into lobbying, and that's now been almost 30 years, 29 to be exact. So when I'm in a dinner with friends or I'm in a dinner with people that I don't know, or a business networking event, and somebody asks me, so what do you do for a living? I'll answer that I'm a lobbyist. And the reaction I get from that comment or that statement of what I do and what my profession is, it changes depending on where I am. And I'm saying that because I'm Canadian Spanish, so sometimes I'm in Canada, most of the time I'm in Spain. In the case of Spain, most people will actually look at me rather blank-eyed and say, what is a lobbyist? And then I have to explain what lobbying is. The easiest way of explaining it is actually using the terminology that is used in the press, which is not always necessarily the best of terminology. So in Spanish, for example, you'll have tráfico de influencias, which means trafficking with influences in the public administration. I use those terms because that's what people are going to understand, which doesn't mean that that's what I'm going to do. And what that allows me to do then is actually get into a conversation about what is a lobbyist and what is lobbying all about. Like I was saying earlier on, in Canada, if somebody asks me what I do and I say I'm a lobbyist, they'll tend to know what a lobbyist is. The reaction might be a little bit, not necessarily negative, but surprised. Because everybody hears about lobbying, but actually people don't come in contact with lobbyists. But there is greater knowledge of what lobbying is in Canada, and I think the United States, or even in Brussels, just because there are more lobbyists, and it's actually more integrated into the systems, the political systems in those countries. I would say that most of my family members, even on the Canadian side, don't necessarily understand what I do and what lobbying is. I do really think that there is a lot to be done in terms of educating society as to the role a lobbyist plays. I did that for many years, and then I got kind of tired of it. Again, I've been doing this for 30 years. I think it's for up to younger generations now to continue educating the public. But yeah, the reaction I'll get is that usually, again, from somebody who's close to me, is they won't necessarily understand what lobbying is. So the connotation of lobbying kind of changes a bit depending on where you are, right? So in the case, as I was saying earlier on, in my case, I share two cultures and two countries, which is Canada and the United States and Spain. Two vastly different cultures, I always say. One tends to be the Canadian one, let's say a little bit more rigid, a little bit more law-abiding, and the Spanish one being a little bit more flexible, not necessarily not law-abiding, but more flexible. And the connotations are slightly different, but I do think that there is a common denominator, which is a lack of trust in a lobbyist and in what a lobbyist does. And I think that lack of trust, so questioning the ethics behind the activity of the lobbyist and the lobbying profession, But I think that comes, so that's the case in both Canada and in Spain. Unfortunately, in the case of Spain, it tends to be linked directly with corruption. In the case of Canada, it tends to be related maybe not necessarily to corruption, but to backdoor wheeling and dealing, negotiating between the private sector and the government. Lobby Non Olet, I probably haven't said it properly anyways. Latin's not very good. I don't think it stings. On the contrary, lobbying really should be seen as something that it oils or greases the decision-making process.